All right, so good morning and hello everyone. My name is Apu and I'm from Injury Matters. I'm the Injury Prevention Officer and I'm so excited to be facilitating this webinar today, which will be looking at multicultural communities and effective engagement strategies within the injury prevention sector. So thank you all for tuning in. I would really appreciate you all tuning in today and taking the time out of your busy schedules to learn about and increase your knowledge around multicultural communities and how best to work with them. Today I am facilitating this webinar from Wajak Noongar Buja. So I'd like to acknowledge the Wajak Noongar people who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm facilitating this webinar today. And I also want to pay my respects to their elders past and present, as well as their leaders emerging. As an immigrant myself, I'm constantly and actively educating myself on the dark history and subsequent oppression and discrimination that the Indigenous people of Australia faced. And I also, because of that, want to recognise that Australia always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'd also like to know where you're all tuning in from today, so please use the chat box to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land you are tuning in from. Before we start, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping points. So can everyone please mute themselves just by checking that your mute button is on so that people can hear the presenters clearly and we don't get any interruptions. Also feel free to unmute yourself when we do ask questions or if you have a question. For Deb, we'd also strongly encourage you to ask any questions by using the chat box that should be at the bottom of your screen. We'll just go over this at the end, or if Deb wants to kind of answer any, she can. We're also, if you have any more than one person tuning in from tuning into today's workshop with you, we'd just love to know how many there are in the room so that we can use that for recording purposes. And also just if you have any technical issues, use the chat box as well. We'll make sure to help you through that. And also this webinar, this workshop is recorded. Just a bit about Injury Matters and what we actually do. We are for safer people and places, and Injury Matters aims to prevent and reduce the impact of injury within the Western Australian community. And we do this through advocating and providing education for injury prevention, as well as providing support for people who have been impacted by injury. Today's workshop is brought to you through the No Injury program, which is supported by the WA Department of Health. No Injury is a statewide program which aims to enhance the capacity of injury prevention and safety promotion practitioners to deliver quality injury prevention activities. We do this through training events, resources, and networking opportunities to support the injury prevention sector. Given the diversity of injury in WA, the program involves a variety of injury topics. However, today we're going to be focusing on engagement within the multicultural community. WA is home to a wide culturally diverse population, with each culturally and linguistically diverse community sharing their own unique identity and experiences. The three leading injury areas affecting people from multicultural communities in WA are drowning, intentional self-harm, and violence. With diversity being such a buzzword today, I'm sure we're all here to learn more and love to learn more about how to make our organizations and services more inclusive. As health professionals, we need to recognize and address our own personal biases, and it's important for us to be aware of situations that make us feel uncomfortable, question ourselves, and take responsibility to learn and develop our cultural competence. Cultural competence is genuinely present when we can unconsciously hold culture in high regard and use this to inform and guide our work. So to talk more through this, as she is the expert, I wanted to introduce Deb. Deb is an engaging facilitator with over 3 decades of experience, knowledge, and learnings from working collaboratively with culturally and linguistically diverse communities throughout her career. So I'll just hand it over to you, Deb.
Right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending this this session on cultural competency and responsiveness in the workplace. And we're looking through the looking glass. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that maybe some people attended the summit last year. Today, I intend to just do a quick revision of what we're going to do, what I talked about in the summit. Some of you may have attended, some of you may not have attended. But I also would like to, the main core of it's going to be a case study that we're going to break out in groups after morning tea. And that will take a fair bit of time because I really want you to deconstruct the scenario and take into consideration everything that we've learnt today and all your knowledge in the past. First things first with cultural competency, it is a journey. And I hope that everyone got their hand out. It's your journey because there's some really valuable resources and information in that. I did send that handout to you. And the references are really valuable references. They're up to date, and I highly recommend you having a look at that booklet. And it just explains a bit more about cultural competency and responsiveness, and some excellent research and resources are in that may be of value to you. I also like to thank the participants who actually left what they wanted to get out of this workshop. I had to summarize some of it, but basically it's about people from diverse communities and looking at mental health, family domestic violence. People wanted to know more about actual community engagement and promotion, and support for people from diverse backgrounds. And finally, basically issues affecting migrants in the West Australian community as we speak. Now, we know it's been a harrowing couple of years with COVID, and that's taken all of our attention. I'm glad that we are doing a Zoom at the moment because I don't know about you and your communities, but people are going down like flies. So bear with me. Zoom is never a perfect medium, but hopefully we'll get through with the wonderful support of APU for over the next 3 hours. And thanks for the acknowledgement to country or APU. It was great. Okay, so my background, a little bit about me. As Apu said, that I've been working with diverse with people from migrant communities and from within the Indigenous mob for the last 30 odd years. But in my final years, I went to the University of Western Australia, doing international relations and working with governments from different countries, mainly from the developing world, well, ranging from Indonesia to Africa, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, with those governments, as well as looking after their students and a team of international scholarship students. From there, I worked in MMRC as a facilitator in cultural competency and responsiveness. So here I am today, and I hope we have a good day. Okay, so I'm just going to share the screen now. Okay, sorry. Just take a bit of time to get rid of that screen. Oh, sorry about that. As I said, I haven't done this for some time. Oh. Apu, I might
Yep.
need you to put up my, I think I've just lost my,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Did you have a tab that you can?
Yeah, I'll just have another look, but it's
Okay.
just not coming up. No, my PowerPoint has been lost. Well,
Okay.
that's a great start, everyone. Sorry about that.
That's right. I have it, but yeah, just
Oh,
let me
no, I
know.
found it. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to
Oh,
take yours
yeah.
down?
There you
Yep.
go.
Sorry. Just a bit nervous about this. Online. Can you see it now?
No,
It's not coming up.
no, it's because you're sharing your um, files screen. So you can
Yeah.
just stop sharing again, and then you should be able to share screen, and then the tab should be,
See,
it
it's
should
not
pop up in
there.
your,
I had it there. Oh, no. That's a drag. Oh, dear me.
so
The,
on Zoom when you share,
you'll have to bring yours up, and
okay.
I'll just ask you when to flick it. Sorry about that. I accidentally yeah. So we need to go up. Yeah. Okay. So if we can go into screen one. Sorry about that. Yep. Next next one. Thanks, love.
Sorry, give me 2 secs.
That's all right. Okay, I just wanted to talk about your Zoom etiquette here. So can you mute your microphone when someone is talking and keep your video on? It's much more if it's engaging. And when it's your turn to speak, remember to unmute your microphone. Can you please state your name before you say something? Like I say, this is Deb, I would like to. There'll be opportunities, as you can read, during the workshop where you can ask questions. There's also a chat line. At the end of each outcome, I will ask Apu to look at the chat line if that's possible, or I can look at it. And if you have a question that needs some answer, please go to the reactions tab and put up the hand. Remember, this is an interactive workshop. Please share your opinion when you're prompted to do so. So thanks, Apu. Next one. Yeah. So today, just quickly, as I explained, I want to go to understand the difference between migrants and former refugees. Our migrant community is very diverse, and people come on different visas for different purposes to Western Australia. But one of probably the biggest gap is the difference between people that come on other visas other than former refugee visas. So I just wanted to speak to you about that because that's probably the most challenging of all the communities that you can work with. Okay. Well, gain a deeper understanding of cultural competence and responsiveness. We'll talk a bit about the lens and unconscious bias, but in the final outcome, we'll be looking at this case study where you'll be going to groups. And I really want you to come up with some strategies with that case study and try to address things that you've learned throughout the session and also what you currently know. Okay, next, thanks. I had to put this in because some people say, why migration? And this is just one policy position paper from the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, but also there are many social benefits as well from having migration, particularly about enriching our culture. I'm sure I came from Fremantle, and my world was so enriched when I'm showing my age here, when the Italians started and Portuguese started moving into Fremantle. Instead of eating meat and three veg, and all of a sudden we had calamari and beautiful whiting and all this new food came into my cultural mix when I was in Fremantle. So there are a lot of great social benefits with cultural diversity, not only just economic advantages. Okay, thanks, Apu. Okay, well, we've got, I just so that you can get sparked into all of this, I want you to go into a quiz. There is a poll there. Apu, can you just talk about this one? How you're
Yeah.
going to do it?
So I can't really at the moment because I'm screen sharing, but if I know your co-host in the polls, can you go into it and
Yep.
launch the poll?
Okay. Yep. I'll launch the
Yep.
poll. Yep.
Thank you.
There we go.
So people can just interact with it and tell us what you think is the answer to the questions on the screen at the moment.
There's two questions there. Do I have to do different pages? Um,
Yeah, so the second one is for the next slide. So we'll just do the first one for now.
yep. Okay.
Are you getting the results, Deb?
Yeah, the results are coming up. I'm
Okay.
just waiting for 100%
It'll be
have
interesting.
answered. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for the question. So the question was this data that I've got here for question 1 is coming from the census, West Australian census, but it's from 2016. Now, there is a problem. We had a census in 2020, but none of the data has been released. Well, I couldn't see it anyway. So what I've used is the 2016 data, but this is a really significant question that of 32% of the people in WA born overseas, from that figure, the number of people born overseas from non-English, non-main English speaking countries is lower than those born overseas from main English speaking countries. Now, the answer is it's false, right? Because West Australia is quite unique that of the 32% of people who are born overseas in Western Australia, there are more people from non-English speaking backgrounds. There's 17% of that 32% is, or 17% of the population are from non-English speaking backgrounds. Now, this is really significant because language and culture are inextricably bound, right? It's all about communication. Culture is about how you behave and how you communicate either verbally or non-verbally. So language and culture are very, very closely bound. So it's quite important for West Australians to understand that we do have people, that our migrant population is more people from a non-English speaking background than English speaking background of the people born overseas here. So that's quite an important stat. Okay, the second one, the number of registered religious faiths is 130. So you could imagine religion is not a culture, like Islam is not a culture. It is an influencer of culture, and we have to always respect the fact that religion has a role in culture, and yet there's 130 different religions in Western Australia alone. So thank you for that. Okay, let's look at this next one. Has everyone answered that one? Do I share results with that one?
You have to launch the second question, the second poll. Yeah.
Yep. Sorry, I'm just still on the first one.
Oh, okay.
Hold it. Where's the second poll? Sorry. Sorry. continue. Okay. No.
You got it?
Well, it's interesting. I can't get to the next page.
It should be in the drop down.
Yeah, I'm just looking for the drop down.
No, we can just discuss answers if
Yeah,
it's not
we just
working.
might have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone. I'm just so out of practice with this. Okay, the next question is the number of languages and dialects, including 50 first Australian languages, is you can have a look at that answer. It's a bit different having no poll, but anyway.
We can't see answers. Do you want to talk about what the answer is?
Yep, I'm just okay. I'm just giving everyone some time to have a look
okay.
at.
Right.
And the next question, the largest refugee intake in 2019 is from which country? Which is Syria, B, Burma, C, Afghanistan, or D, the Congo? Okay, so the answer to the first one is there's 270 different languages spoken in Western Australia, according to the last census. And, you know, that again is about the issue about language and culture and just how diverse the cultural backgrounds of people in West Australia are. Okay. And I hope everyone got that one. And WA's largest refugee intake in 2019 from which country is from Burma. I hope people got that. A lot of people, let's see. Yeah. Okay. So Burma, and now the reason it's from Burma is that it's our largest group from Burma is with the Karen and the Chen, who have had probably some of them have been in the refugee camps for over 20 years. And fortunately, we've always, for the last 10 years, from Burma, the Chin and the Karen have been the largest group coming into Western Australia. So, and it's interesting, generally, the Karen primarily in the Mirrabooka, in city of Stirling, and also in the city of Canning. It's interesting because city of Canning, city of Stirling are the two largest groups of cultural diverse, of CALD communities. And if you want to know, I need to tell you now that the important thing, if you want to know in your area what the large groups are, I'm sure your LGA will have that information, but also I can't speak highly enough of the Office of Multicultural Interests. And in the handbook, I've put in their webpage for references for a lot of information. So you can source that through the online references in the handbook that I sent you. But when in doubt, the Office of Multicultural Interest has a lot of information on the migrant community groups. It has a lot of information on some data and stats and where the major groups are within the local government areas in Western Australia. Also, yeah, so the OMI website is a really valuable search platform for you to get more information about the different communities and about individual communities in Western Australia. Okay, well, thanks for doing that quiz. I'm sorry about the poll. As I said, I haven't worked Zoom for a long, long time, for over a year. Okay, so I just briefly wanted to put in the fact that we do have Equal Opportunity Acts, and we are covered by the federal acts and by the West Australian Equal Opportunity Act of 1904. I've just put them up there, but anyway, the fact is that we need to respect that every every different community has a right to their own cultural heritage and their own cultural practices, as long as it doesn't break Australian law. And that quite often happens. Well, it doesn't have, but there are things like you can't have cultural practices if it involves polygamy or marrying children, very young, or with female genital mutilation or anything like that. They are not anything that breaks Australian law is not permitted in terms of cultural tradition or activity. Okay, thanks. Okay, I put this up to remind people about substantive equality, and it's about achieving equitable outcomes as well as equal opportunity. Now, I've been into some country towns doing workshops where some community groups are saying we treat everyone equal. And I said, so what does that mean to them? They said, well, we treat everyone equal. And I said, what if a person cannot understand English? What do you do then? Oh, well, we try to get them. I heard someone say we try to get them to understand. I sort of animate what I want them to happen. Now, what substantive equality means that if someone cannot understand English in Western Australia, it is their right to be able to have an interpreter. Now, what I've found, and I hopefully this has changed over time, but what I've found is that organisations, when they apply for funding, they don't put money in for interpreting. Now, when you're working with diverse groups, particularly with our diverse groups in Western Australia, you need to put an interpreting budget in your funding. Interpreters are essential, or else you just can't communicate. And it's their right to have an interpreter. Another way you can get around that is by having diverse people in your workforce that speak many different languages. And that sort of saves you a bit of money in terms of your funding for interpreting. So a very important strategy is that you do get diverse people within your socially inclusive work environment. Okay, thanks. So this is just an example of what substantive equality is about. If everyone has a box, the little one still doesn't see it. But some people need a bit of extra help, whether it's interpreting or whether they need a creche, accessibility if you're dealing with a mother who needs to see you and you need someone to look after the child, or if you're in a group environment. I know a lot of organisations that working with mothers do have creches, and that's fantastic, particularly a lot of NGOs. Okay, so inclusiveness is when in that picture is when you've got a wire fence so everyone can just look through the wire fence. Okay, that's the third frame. Okay, I've put this up for you now. So anyway, has anyone got any questions on diversity in Western Australia? I'm just sort of trying to go through it fairly quickly. Is there anything in the chat line? Any questions or flags or anything? Can you see anyone? No? Okay, I'll move on. What I've got here is, this is UNHCR data. Now, you've also got a link in your website in your handbook to this data. I put this up because UNHCR hasn't done a great diagram like this for the latest data. But when I was looking at the latest data, in the last 2 years, so when's this? Yeah, 2020. In the last 18 months, it's gone from 79.5 million forcibly displaced people in the world to 90 million as we speak today. When I first started doing this workshop 5 years ago, it was 63 million. So this is how quickly the people are being displaced in the world. Now, displaced means You can be internally displaced or externally displaced. And internally displaced is people who move within their own country, maybe because of fire, it could be fire or famine or civil war. And then you get externally displaced. So at the moment, well, it's more now, but in this data in 2020 was 45.7 million people were internally displaced in their own country. That even included the people from the fires in the eastern states from the Great Fires, when people lost their homes and everything. It includes all of those kinds of people. There were 26 million refugees registered in the world, of which 5.6 million were Palestinian refugees. So that means that they've registered refugees with the UNHCR. And you can see there's 4.2 million asylum seekers. Yeah, and yes, Agnes, I see that it would be interesting to see the data after the Ukraine war. I would say that it's probably gone up now to about 92 million in the last 2 months. Yep. So, it's a huge amount of people who do not live in their home. So this data is quite interesting if you go into UNHCR, if you want to know more, if you're interested in this sort of stuff. I just put that up for you. Because I need to segue into about working with refugees. It's interesting when you talk about with injury matters and we talk about safety, right? Now, we've talked to some of our clients at when I was working at MMRC, and we're saying, when we're talking about safety in the home or safety on the roads, or talk about using seatbelts or whatever. And some people would say to me, what do you mean safety? There's no bombs coming down from the sky. I feel safe in Australia. So you really did have to work hard to change that broader meaning of safety into our world in Western Australia about how to be safe, how to make sure that you do know how to swim, because we're a place that works with water and recreates with water. So when our refugees and this is data coming from assets, the refugee recovery process is that they need to reduce anxiety and fear. As you can imagine, we've had quite a lot of refugees here and that have been in refugee camps for as long as 20 years, as I said earlier, or maybe even 15 years. So even though they've been out of the war zone for that long, they're still in a position of having to live in quite dire situations in refugee camps, okay? And they have to overcome grief and loss, distrust and hopelessness, and there's guilt and shame. I mean, and the guilt and shame, usually I would ask you to tell me what that is, but in this environment, the guilt and shame will be probably that they've survived and have left family behind. Shame could be, I mean, we know that rape is a tool of war, and there's a lot of for women, there's all that the issue around being subject to sexual violence. So they have to reduce all that when they get here, and they need to restore control and safety. And safety isn't necessarily talking about prevention of in the micro scale. It's more on the macro scale. Attachments, connections, identity and meaning and purpose. A lot of issues for refugees is that they haven't brought their paperwork. And you've got refugees who are very successful business people, doctors, from a whole stream of skills that they cannot get recognized here in Australia because they don't have their documentation. So that's a challenge in themselves, just to get that meaning and purpose restored for them, and dignity and value. So all of those things are really are primary when former refugees first arrive in Australia. In the handbook, I did put in some of the issues that the refugees do need to deal with, and that is having to deal with stress, um, settlement stress, you know, that sense of displacement and how stressful that can be. A perceived notion of racism and discrimination, and people do feel that when they're coming into Australia. There's been Vaughan and Hogg did a research on that and said that was very, very clear, particularly in the city of Stirling and Canning. Intergenerational conflict, kids are going to school, they're learning Australian culture a lot faster than their mother and their parents, and sometimes that can, I mean, we do have intergenerational conflict anyway, but let alone it's compounded when you're also dealing with differences in culture and learning new cultures. So that can become quite a rift in families. Low English. This is something to remember for the case study. No real understanding of our institutional systems and what it means. I mean, even if you're working for an NGO, some people still think that you're working for the government, for example, and or maybe you're working for a government agency. But you know, you have to really be able to work and develop trust because of people's experience with government, and you know, particularly in times of war. And also they're dealing with their lack of extended family, because most people that are coming from these countries are active collective societies and a high context societies. So, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. Okay, thanks, Apu. Okay, so theoretically, with culture, I was looking, there's over 162 different definitions of culture. When I'm doing these workshops, I tend to lean towards Gert Hofstede, who's still alive and still does a lot of research on culture and cultural difference and and cultural diversity. But this cultural iceberg, in your handbook, I've given you a fantastic map of the cultural iceberg, which is a really good reference point for you when you're working with different cultures, because you know, each culture is different. As we know, there's so many different cultures here in West Australia. It's really, nothing is the same for each culture. And as a matter of fact, nothing is the same for each person. There's one thing that Hofstede really talks about, and that is that culture is very much a set of programmed behaviors that you learn within your own context and within your own families and in your own environment. But culture is still a shadow behind you, that people are actually individuals first. And I think you have to remember that when you're working with individual people, is that you treat them as an individual first, but to remember that there is a shadow of the culture behind them, and that culture has influences. Now, when we think of culture, you think of food and fashion, music and language and literature. But under the iceberg is very important deep culture, and that is things you're not aware of, and that's like communication styles. Excuse me, I need to have a drink. Usually when we're face to face, I like people to come and give us some ideas about what they see here. But if you can just look at that, I mean, you've got your communication styles and rules. I mean, eye contact. I know with the Sudanese children, they do not look at adults in the eye. Though I was working with one Sudanese lad who helped me do some workshops, and he was, when he first started, he was standing and all the people were sitting down that he was talking to. So he turned and talked to the wall. And he explained while he was talking to the wall that it's against his culture for him to be standing higher than adults. And so, of course, and that was my era, you know, I'm on the cultural competency journey still and will be for the rest of my life. And so what I had to do was get a chair immediately and put it down so that Atem could sit down and talk up to his audience, to the participants. So that was something I learned even on the run while I was doing a workshop, that it was inappropriate for him to be standing and looking down at everyone sitting who are listening to him while he told his story. So they're the things that, you know, if you just get caught out not understanding things like people say, I don't know whether to look people in the eye or not. Well, you know, you just got to do cultural competency teaches you that you've got to learn about the culture that you're going to be working with. And for me, that was my era with Atem. I didn't know that he couldn't stand higher than the participants. So it's you just got to keep on being humble and listen to what's important to other people in terms of their culture and their cultural practices. So this iceberg is really valuable iceberg. So you've got notions of courtesy and manners, friendship, and concepts of self, time, past and future, fairness and justice. You also have, in terms of injury matters, and I should put this in some context, you know, you'll have some, maybe in mental health, some people would just not understand how we determine mental health and what is illness or schizophrenia, or even our notion towards disability. In some cultures, their notion towards all those things will be very different. And so you, in your context, in your work, you need to have, the best thing you can do is to find out what they believe disability, what its context is in their culture. So it's good to have that conversation. And a lot of the literature, particularly recent research, is saying that it's great if you can hear how they will deal with disabilities within their own culture, and then you come in and to explain how we deal with it and see if you can come together with a good, suitable solution that suits how you do things and how they would like things to be done. And this is really important. I mean, when we were working with the Sudanese women, a lot of them just didn't like to take our medicine and told me that they'd rather go back to Sudan and see their tribal doctor to deal with the issues, that they really don't trust the white pill. So, you know, when you're working with that, it takes a lot of trust and a lot of communication to get people to understand the importance and how we work with medicines, right? Okay. It's no one's got any comment on that or anything they'd like to say? I can't, yeah. Okay. Right, so have a look at that in your handbook as well. So here we have, in terms of our cultural adjustments, this is a Hofstadter dimensions of culture, and he talks about high context cultures and low context cultures. Again, I've put a greater explanation in the handbook on this. But in this, you can see that Australian Indigenous communities and a lot of Indigenous Sudanese uh, communities are very high context cultures. They have they talk about the collective. They talk when I talk to a lot of people from different cultures, they will say we, or I remember talking to one of my colleagues at work from Africa, and when I asked her a question about herself, she'd always talk about we. She wouldn't say I, she'd always say we. So it was really talking about the collective. It was a really interesting experience. Whereas the low context cultures talk about the individual. And again, I've put that in the handbook for you about individual and collectiveness, right? I mean, when in individual, we like our privacy, whereas collectivism stresses on belonging to a group and sharing things. So the power, it's important to understand the high context and low context cultures when you're trying to communicate and develop relationships with them. I mean, a lot of my students used to say to me, "You're very direct, Deb." And I'm going, yes, because I'm on a time frame and I've got a lot of things to do. Whereas I'd have students come in to see me, and before they'd tell me what they want, I'd have to hear the whole backstory about what's happening with the children, what's happening in their studies and everything. And I'd have 5 minutes with them. I'd say, "Can you just tell me what you want?" And they get very upset with me, but in the end, because from a low context culture, I wanted to know directly, have direct communication. So they're the sorts of things that when you're working with these different cultural groups, is you have to be aware that some people are not as direct in their communication, that they like to develop a relationship. The Japanese were very much into developing a relationship. Same with Indigenous culture. When I worked with some of the communities, you couldn't just go in and get a discussion and an outcome in one day. It would take 6 months before you get a final decision from things. So that's what they mean by high context, low context cultures. So if you're interested in that, you should have a look into the handbook. I've written a fair bit about that information. Yeah. So how are we going for time? I just need to have a look at our time. Yep, sorry. No, 48. Okay. So what I want to talk to you here is about cultural competency. Cultural competency is a lifelong journey. And what it is, it's about and all of you might be saying, "I want to know a bit more," but I just want to give you this general information because these are the tools you use when you're working in any area with people from different cultures, whether it's a refugee, someone on a business visa, someone who's on family reunion. And you might be talking about domestic violence, you might be talking about mental health, you might be talking about you might be wanting to do some promotion for your organization to the CAL communities. But these are the key elements or the bottom line of what you need to be able to really effectively work with people from different cultures. And that is to develop your knowledge of the culture you're going to be working with, to ensure that you have the right skills to work with that culture. And you've got to have the right attitude. You have to be interested. You have to be curious. You have to want to know how things work, right? So that's what cultural competence actually means. It means you're constantly developing your knowledge. You're constantly looking at your building your skills, particularly your listening skills and your communication skills, your use of interpreters, and adapting your professional skills, because sometimes you'll hear things from people that totally question your professional knowledge and ability. And you have to sort of deconstruct that somewhat. And later on, I'll give you an example of that when I finish this session. I've got a great example of how you can use all these skills when you're trying to resolve a problem or to get a solution. Importantly, if you're going to work with someone from the Karen community, I highly recommend that you read up about the Karen to understand the Karen. If you've got a colleague who is Karen, talk to them about their culture, understand where they're coming from and what's important to them. You probably know that the Karen are primarily Christian culture, and they really like to be, they can be, not all of them can be very insular and keep to themselves. I found that with the Bhutanese students that I worked with, no matter what university they went to, they all lived in the same place in Herdsman, and they all played their own soccer. You couldn't get them to play soccer at the university soccer teams, right? They had their own soccer team. So they were very, very much wanting to be with their own group. There's one thing I forgot beforehand. The most important thing about what culture is, other than being about traditions, norms, environment, all those things that influence culture, the most important thing about culture is about familiarity and acceptance. And Panini talks about that. He's in yeah, his research, that was his definition of culture. It's about being familiar and accepted. And this is something that's really important, when people say things like, why do all the Italians live in Fremantle? Because they know their culture, they know about familiarity and acceptance. Of course, you get individuals say, oh, well, no, I'm Italian, I've just arrived, I'm going to live in Swan to grow grapes. Well, you've got individual needs, but generally culture is about familiarity and acceptance. And I find that a really simple way to acknowledge that. But you can look at lots of other examples. There are other examples and definitions in your handbook. Okay, so cultural competency is all about developing your knowledge, developing your skills, and developing your awareness. And ideally, a culturally competent person is someone who has a strong knowledge of your own culture, of your own behavior, and your own shapes. Someone who's culturally competent values diversity and willing to learn about other cultures. You have the skills to feel comfortable with diverse cultures and good communication skills. Most importantly, we're going to talk about this a bit more, is you do not stereotype. And you have a background in language, customs, and values from different cultures. So, and ultimately, culturally competent person means you've got friends from different cultures, and that you actually have all those elements to be culturally competent. And it's a lifelong journey. You'll never actually be 100% culturally competent, but it's just something you just keep on building on. Thanks, Apu. So with cultural responsiveness, and this is a new term, it's a new way of thinking. So you've got to be open to the new ideas that might conflict with your own ideas and values and beliefs in your culture. And this is where doctors have a lot of problems with people from different cultures, have very strong beliefs in, say, acupuncture, or, have different beliefs in different medical practices. Sometimes that can be there's been talk about this word cultural humility, and that terminology came up in the health profession because doctors always They know what is best, and yes, we all respect that. In other cultures, they have their own capacity for health and healing, and sometimes those two ideals do clash. And so we talked about cultural humility, that it is valuable to listen to how people from their own culture, how they deal with the issues themselves, and the differences, they are equal. Some people have difficulty with this, but it's what cultural responsiveness is. So, for example, in many cultures, spiritual beliefs are an important part of their overall well-being. So that's cultural responsiveness. And we'll be testing that when we do the case study. So, yes, thanks. So, okay, please, on your chat line, look at this picture of a pig. Can you just type in what comes to mind? First thing that comes to mind when you see this pig. Have people got it on the chat line? Yep. Happy, cute. Yep. Farm, cute. Enjoying itself. Farm. Needs to blow nose. That's a good one. Farm pigs. Food source. Yep. Good on you, Matt. Happy. Fat. Yep. Great. Well, yep. Happy and cute. That's great. So that's our first impression when we see a pig. Where in some cultures, can I have the next one? Thanks. In other cultures, this fellow here, he thinks of bacon, of food, whatever. But in Papua New Guinea, when you talk about pigs, you talk about money. Money in Papua New Guinea, within Papua New Guinean culture, is they have the kina, but they also, the value is your pig. And I had Papua New Guinean students that would say to me, my wife is worth 30 pigs, whereas Peter's wife's only worth 8, and you can tell the difference. Now, you can imagine my reaction to that, sort of being believes in equality. I wasn't quite happy about that, but I had to listen to it. And this is how they valued things, was the value through pigs, not through kina. And so that was a real shock for me, but I had to accept that and understand how that all worked. And I tell you what, Papua New Guinean culture is a very interesting culture to actually try to understand and learn about. So yeah, so in other cultures, I mean, as we know with Islam, a pig is not is not appropriate at all to refer to, and apologies to people if anyone's taken offense of me using the picture of the pig. But it's just a good example of different value. I could do it with a cow, and people would look at a cow, and the Hindus would say it's sacred, and someone else would say it's cheese. And then people say, sirloin steak, So, so different cultures perceive and see things immediately from different perspectives. And yeah, okay, thanks. Next one. So when you see things from a different perspective, you have to take that into consideration when you're working with these people. And that's why it takes time and trust when you're working with people from clients from different cultures. I need to segue quickly into what now is unconscious bias, because I did want to talk about our cultural lens, and we all have it. I have my cultural lens. No matter which country and which culture you have your cultural lens. I mean, I grew up in Fremantle, so my lens is influenced by the Italian culture. When I was a child, I used to speak Italian because I lived with the Italians, used to eat with the Italians. Actually, my parents never saw me because I was always with the Italians. But everyone's culture, you create all your own biases, right? So I've just put up some of the biases. We've got the things like affinity bias, which is when you have a connection with a group. And a good example is like the Dockers. I hope everyone's a Dockers supporter. Joe, I see you've got a purple shirt, cardigan on. That's fantastic. I'm a Dockers supporter. So that's your affinity bias. Then you get ageism. Well, we know about that. In Australia, if you're over 60 and you're going for a job, it can be very, very difficult to nail a job. But some people get age bias in their biasness. I don't want to go through more, but confirmation bias, for example. Oh dear, yes. Sorry. Oh, you're an Eagles. Oh, Joe, you've got to change your cardigan. Joe says she's an Eagles supporter. Oh, that's really sad at the moment, Joe. Very sad. And then we have confirmation bias. When someone says, I really don't like those American ships coming into Garden Island, or I don't like those nuclear subs coming in. And everyone's going, yes, yes, they're terrible. We don't want that. Yeah, and where everyone confirms your bias, whereas someone else will say, hang on a minute, we are a part of the American triumvirate, and we've got to provide those. Anyway, I can go on. You can get the halo bias, of your first impressions. Oh, I don't like that person. His eyes are too close together. Have you ever heard anyone say that? Or his eyes I don't like him. His eyes are too close together. That sort of thing is the halo horn bias. And then, of course, you get name biases, which is significant, particularly when you're they use this as examples when you're talking about inclusivity in job applications. And they see people's names, and then you've got an immediate bias that that they're from a different country. So lately, in some workplaces, they don't have the name, so the people on the selection panel can just judge by the CV, because can be name bias. Now, someone asked what halo and horn bias is. Well, that is just by your first impressions, right? So you see someone that has one trait of a person overshadows everything else, just by what they look like, like I gave the example of someone's eyes close together. Or maybe you can get a bias because someone is vision impaired, or has a patch in their eye, or something like that. So you establish those biases. Now, when you look at biases, were set up in our brain because there's so many things in the world. Our brain has to do a shortcut. It is about shortcuts. And the shortcuts are set there for our survival. I mean, a shortcut is, we know we don't, over the millions of years, we knew never to walk in the middle of a lion's den, because we'll probably get eaten, right? So our bias would tell us, our fear and flight would tell us that that's dangerous. And that's what biases were about. It's about our self-survival. But our biases get developed by our environment as well. So what I need you to do is to retrain, particularly when you're working with different cultures, to retrain your unconscious bias. Thanks, Apu. Could you? Yeah. So your bias is developed by your cultural lens, right? And we bring our stereotypes, and our biases bring our stereotypes and our assumptions to the surface. And what we have to do is have to know when that is happening, when you're working with particular clients, right? And it is practice, and it's sort of like a torchlight moment. I mean, can everyone if you can have a go, can you all fold your arms, please? Can you just fold your arms, right? Okay. Now, those people that have their right arm on top, like me, you think you're sexy, right? Okay, those that have the left arm on top, it's even better because other people think you're sexy. Cool. Now, can you all please try and change your arms over? Right? Can you please, can someone make some comments about, can people make comments about how they feel when they change their arms over? Right? Uncomfortable, unnatural, very awkward, very odd, uncomfortable. Yes, you get the point. When you fold your arms, that's your bias working. You just naturally do it. You don't even think about it. You don't think, I'm going to fold my arms now. I'm going to put my right, I feel sexy today. I'm going to put my right arm on top. No, you don't do that. You just do it. So when you have to change, you start to feel awkward, uncomfortable. This is the time when one of your clients says something and you feel very awkward or uncomfortable about it. That is usually your stereotypes and your biases kicking in. It's just a natural thing. We all have it. So when you feel that discomfort, that's a torchlight moment. That's when you have to reflect on how you're thinking. What are you thinking? And you have to look at this reflective practice to build your cultural responsiveness. You've got to really learn how your unconscious is thinking and the assumptions you make and the way you treat people. This is a really good thing to practice. So whenever you feel awkward, uncomfortable, I don't like what I'm hearing, have a look and try to see it from the other person's perspective. It's a really, for me, I always, if I'm in that situation when I was working with different customers, and boy, I can tell you, and I'll be quite honest, there was one particular culture I found really hard working with. And every now and again, the cultural attaché would say things to me, and I'd just take a little step to the left, you know, to readjust my thinking and say, don't take this personally, don't jump, don't bite back. You know, I am in the embassy, I'm on their country, I have to respond appropriately, right? So you need to understand, and this is what dealing with your bias is all about. It's quite a good trick, really. Think of you crossing your arms. Okay, 35. Let me have a look. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, next one. Thanks. Okay, so if people just want to write in comments what they think about this this cartoon. Yep. Is anyone making any comments? Different perspectives. Thanks, Jackie. Interesting to see two different perspectives. Great. Yep. I've seen this before. It's a good illustration of bias. Yes, it is. Yeah. It's an absolute. Who is telling women what to do? Where? Yep. Thanks, Olivia. Yep. What this is doing is it's cultural driven. It's also the thing about this that everyone has a right to their own culture. I mean, we do see girls walking down the beach just like that, and we do see women in the niqab. But what this means is that neither of them are wrong. These are both cultural practices, right? So the thing is that you can't judge. Well, you shouldn't judge. So when you're working with people from different cultures who have really different values to you, You can't judge that they're either right or wrong, unless they're breaking the law in Australia. That's the only thing that puts a dampener on or puts an issue there. Otherwise, it is everyone's right to sort of think that, because you can't judge, and you're seeing things as you are through your lens, not as we don't see them as we are. Okay, so this is a really good example of that neither is right or wrong, that it shouldn't be judged. Okay, thanks, Apu. Okay, so hopefully with the biases, I just wanted to quickly go through that. Usually we do a lot more work on that, but because I really want to get to your core issues and to the case study. The next thing is the final section is about our communication, or not the final section, but this phase is about the communication. And we have the four basic elements, right? We have the verbal behavior, what we say and how we say it. Quite often we talk too fast for people from different cultures. You've got to slow down your language. Sometimes we talk too loud. So you need to actually maybe moderate. If you've got a very loud voice, just keep your voice loud, because a loud voice can make people feel uncomfortable. So we've got our verbal behavior, and also we've got idioms and colloquialisms that you must really be conscious of. And I'm a classic. I make those mistakes all the time. I mean, recently, my friend, who's my colleague, who's Brazilian, she asked me to do something, and I was pretty busy. I said, well, if push comes to shove, I'll do it. And she said, what is this push come to shovel? She didn't understand. So I had to explain to her that if you really want me to do it, I'll do it. But, otherwise I'm quite busy. So, and acronyms are a really good one. And I mean, I used to work at MMRC, or people use acronyms all the time, and that just doesn't make sense to people. So you've got to be careful of your verbal behavior. Your non-verbal behavior, that is just as important. I mean, the way you sit, how you set up the room when you're talking to someone. Are you going to have a barrier? Are you going to sit up higher or lower? When you've got someone coming in the room, it's good to have people on the same level. Yes, that's right, Agnes. And sayings are difficult to translate. Very good. You got to look at your communication style. I talked about that a bit earlier, but if you talk fast, how much you use your hands, they're just things that you need to look at when you're working cross-cultural communication. And what we've just looked at earlier on, and that is your values, your attitudes, and your prejudices, and what we believe is right. This is really important, because you don't need to even, your behavior can just give away whether you believe someone's right or not. So your values, your attitudes, and your prejudices are very much a part of your cross-cultural communication. Yes, thanks, Tammy. The concept of bringing a plate can be difficult. Yes, it can for some. Now, earlier on, at the very beginning, the most important thing I've found when organizations are working with people from different cultures is about them using interpreters. So often I see people not use interpreters, and interpreters are really important. And in the handout, I've put when you should use an interpreter, and that should be when someone doesn't understand what you say, when they look at you blankly. Number two, when you ask a question and they can't answer you, that's a fairly good indicator that they need an interpreter. But the third thing is, and this is really important, is when they're under stress. So they may be able to speak English. It might have English as a second language or third or fourth or fifth language. But if they're under stress, it's really hard to think in any other language other than your first language. And we find that particularly when, say, refugees have to go up to the refugee interview and they say, well, yes, I can speak English. And they get in there under so much stress because the interview is stressful that they really do need an interpreter. They should have an interpreter with them because that's a really stressful environment and people think in their first language. So using interpreters is paramount. Even better if you're using interpreter is you can use telephone interpreting, which can be good because in some small communities, I know in some communities, our clients need like to use telephone because they might get someone who, and they're going to be talking about really important issues, so they don't want anyone to know about. Telephone interpreter can be really good because it might be someone from the eastern states who's interpreting that, and because if it's in West Australia, because we're a smaller community, it might be someone they know. And so the client has a right not to have that interpreter if they don't want them to have that interpreter. So it's always important to check that the client is happy with the interpreter, okay? Because if you're going to be talking about serious issues, I'd rather keep confidential. So check and use correct pronunciations of names, plain English, concrete language. And I'm not going to read that to you, but I'm sure you understand that these are the important elements of intercultural when you're working with someone who doesn't have particularly great English. Okay. Oh, yeah, next one. Sorry, Apu. I put this here because this is, everyone always says in our organization, we've got pamphlets in different languages and blah, 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 blah. But what we're finding, and particularly with some of the new refugees that are coming up, and particularly the women, that they can't read in some cultures like the Hazara. Remember, the Hazara are from Afghanistan, and Afghanistan and the Hazara were, you know, they're quite persecuted tribe of Afghanistan. And when you learn about Afghanistan, you see that there's 4 key tribes: the Afghan, the Pashto, the Hazara, and I can't remember the 4th one. Sorry, but the women, some of the women didn't even learn to read and write in their own language, let alone in English. So pictures, I mean, this is a great example this is from the UNHCR about how to work with social distancing. And organizations, particularly larger organizations, even the Department of Human Services now, they've got great pictorials of explaining how things work. And I really recommend that you use pictures more so, if you can, as an illustration and as a promotional tool than an information tool rather than just pamphlets, right? Pictures are, I mean, unfortunately, it's a lot more expensive, but they are a much better tool for communication. And I just wanted to show you this one as an example. Okay. Right. How are we going for time? I'm nearly ready to have a break. So, yep. This is really important. I really wanted to talk to you about community engagement tips. I think this is what a lot of people wanted in this workshop, was about how to engage with the community, how to get your message across. And that's what I sort of gathered from the feedback I got at the beginning. But the engaging tips are engage communities as early as possible in your process. So if you want, I know that the Surf Life Saving has done a great job in engaging with the community, because there has been quite a few children from refugee and culturally diverse backgrounds, international students as well, who have been drowning in our oceans. And they've done some great work in engaging with communities about swimming. It's one thing that we do. And when I was at the university, the first thing I said to my students is, you're in Western Australia, you need to learn to swim. And so we had to set up for the women at the university pool a special day for the women, the Muslim women, to go and learn to swim because of all of their cultural needs in terms of being in bathers. We introduced them to the bikini, and honestly, some of the Maldivian women got right into it, and actually one has told me she started surfing back at the Maldives. So that's fantastic. But the women it felt much better if they learned to swim, and that the children learned to swim. So you need to get in early as possible with the community to in terms of what your field of experience is. Secondly, you've got to build trust. As I said earlier, you just don't expect to come in with a solution or an idea at the very beginning. And you've got to build trust. I know that a lot of people will start setting up with an organization, maybe on an agency, and one person's starting to build some trust, and then they get moved or get a job promotion, and then someone comes in. Well, that trust has to start to build again. It's really important when you're working with communities that if you're going in, you have to build trust, then you have to get trust of your organization with that community to let them know. Now, so trust is really important. Well, you just have to how to build trust. You build it by active listening, asking questions, ensuring that they are going to give you ideas about how to deal with the problem, not you. How many times you see people go in, our policy says you need to do this, this, and this, and then you go in, you say, well, we're going to run this program for you. And they're going, oh, what do you mean, this program? Well, we've worked out that this is what's best for you. Well, you can't tell anyone what's best. It's best to talk to the community to find out if that is an appropriate program and whether it needs to be changed to suit the cultural needs of that community. And so you need trust and you need time. It's never a quick fix, I'm sorry to tell you, but you need time. You need to recognize the diversity within communities. For example, you need to understand that within one, people say the Afghan community or the Sudanese community. The Sudanese community has many different tribes. You've got the Acholi, the Dinka, the Na, etc., etc. And all of them have their own leaders. When we did a workshop wanting to know with the women from Sudan, because they were having trouble with child protection because the kids were learning about that parents couldn't hit their kids. So when mother would hit the children as a part of the discipline that they've practiced in their culture for years and years, the kids find out it's against the law, so they'd ring the police, and then the police would bring in child protection. Next minute, poor mother is having to deal with the police and child protection because she's been doing something that they've been doing for generations and generations, right? So when we did that workshop, with the Sudanese community, it was a 4-hour workshop. The first 3 hours was taken up, well, admittedly with Department of Communities talking, and then of course the police had to talk, so that took a long time. But then after that, all of the leaders of each of those community groups had to speak to tell the wonderful woman who was how wonderful she is organizing this event. So that went for another 3/4 of an hour, and I was facilitating it. And so in the end, we finally got to talk to the women about what their issues were. And we had half an hour, right? Of a 4-hour workshop, we finally got to the actual core of what we wanted to talk about. So what happened was we found out that one of them was, we got one issue that the parent, out of that half an hour, and that was the mothers wanted to know what the kids are learning at school or how to engage with the school. So that was a great one outcome out of many that could have come out. But that took 4 hours because we had to listen to all of the male leaders say what a wonderful thing it is that we've brought all the women together. So that was just cultural practice. That's just like sitting under a big tree. We weren't in a tree, we were in a hall. But yeah, so, you know, you've got to be able to understand the diversity in communities. You also have to understand that within communities, there's marginalized groups. It might be the LGBTQI group. So, you know, there's always marginalized groups within communities as well. Okay, I've said it our time. One trick is to build capacity. Capacity is get someone from the community to work with you, right? And to get them to let them know what you're trying to do and to get them to be an ally for you and help you to navigate through the community. Avoid over consultation. Poor dear John, who was the head of the Sudanese community, he was so overwhelmed with all different organizations coming in and wanting a piece of him. So you've got to be very mindful of how much workload the community leaders are under. So you've got to be really aware of that. Okay. Make sure you address language issues. For a good thing to understand, again, in the Sudanese, a good example in the Sudanese community is that you might be able to get an Arabic interpreter for the Sudanese community, but if you get an someone who speaks Arabic from Iraq, the language is dialects a bit different to those in Sudan, so that can get a bit complicated. This is why knowledge is really important. You must know the groups that you're going to be working with. Ensure engagement is adequately resourced, you know, making sure that you have money. So if you're going to get a group of women in from one community, that you do have a creche, funding for a creche, for example. Demonstrate respect. And this is the best thing that's happening at the moment. Well, for me, and that other people who I know have been working with communities, identify the bridging generation. Now, the bridging generation are the kids who have arrived and are now going to TAFE, have gone through the school system, and now going to TAFE or university, or are now in the workforce, and they're sort of the first generations, and they're fantastic. Now, to source some people from different communities who you may want to talk to from the bridging generation, you can go to YACWA. That's the Youth Affairs Council in WA, and they be able to guide you through identifying maybe someone who's a good code switcher. That's sort of what the bridging generation does, knows how to code switch between our Western Australian culture and their own mother culture, right? So they know how to switch codes. They know how what the best of each is, what the worst of each is. So it's really valuable to use the bridging generation when you're engaging with with communities, for example. Okay, thanks. Right. Look, I think it's time for a 15-minute break. I definitely need a break. 10:30 on the dot. How's that? So I think we should come back at 1:45, have a 15-minute break, and then we're going to go straight into the case study. Hopefully, I've given you a few clues as we're talking along how to
what you were discussing in your breakout rooms. So let's go to group 1, which was Abby, Ehsan, Jessica, Joanne, Nadia, and Vish. Do you have any takeaways from or key points that you wanted to share?
Thanks, Apu. This is Vish. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
All right. So we've just noted. Is it possible, if I may ask, to put that scenario on the screen, if that's okay? I don't want to miss the questions. Thanks a lot. So yeah, this is a mixture of comments. I think with the first one, build relationships. How would you promote the service? It's through flyers and some visual aids. And then there are some interpretation services and information packs that are available to them in their own language as well. In terms of services, if there are cultural preferences or gender preferences that also can be offered through, if there is need for only a female support worker, that could be offered. So yeah, understanding what are their preferences and cultural needs as well taken into consideration. One of my team members said she might be from Afghanistan by the name. So yeah, just having an example, considering all the, as Deborah mentioned about few things in our session. So something like that. If I may let others add some more inputs from my group, yeah, you're welcome to do so.
Yeah, did anyone have anything else to add from that group in terms of welcoming atmosphere and accessibility?
Maybe tailoring the information to suit the client
Yes.
through sessions. Like how much information is needed. Maybe too much is, we need to know how much is too much. So it will not overwhelm them because they're new to the system, especially with the WA health system. They've just been 12 months here with little English. So breaking down those sessions into, so it won't be overwhelming for them. So and then also ensuring like a comprehensive approach, not just about the service this organization offers, and also offering the reference for others. So of course, when we collect information, this is quite important to know if we get the consent to share and how we are using that, and reassuring them about the privacy. And this is also important. One of our team members mentioned is linking them with cultural associations or any community organizations in the, like say have a morning tea or any events that are available. So yeah, giving them the access to all those. Anything else my group wants to add? I might have missed a lot of points.
One of the team members was saying about creating a support group for the Hazara young mothers as well, to help them to overcome their social isolation.
Yeah, that's a good point. We might go to group 2 then, and if they wanted to add more to the conversation, they can. That was Alicia and Ankita, Deb, Florence, Jackie, and Joe. Did any of you have anything else to add to any of the questions?
Yeah, so I was nominated, put in front of the bus. So I suppose our steps were, none of us really knew much about the Hazara culture. So that was our first port of call was to do research and then to gather some more information from the referring NGO regarding the mum's particular situation. And from there, we thought we'd go to the office. I can't remember what it was, the office OMI, I've written down, multicultural interests, to find a little bit more about what the main groups were in that community and see if we could develop some contacts through there, because we thought if we could make contact with the leaders of those particular groups that mum would then be ultimately a part of, hopefully, that we would then perhaps find information from them about the best methods of meeting with those mums and what sort of cultural opportunities they would prefer to have as a way of building support within that community. And then hopefully we have an opportunity to be able to go to them. Maybe they've already got some established groups that then we may be able to link that mum in with in the future. We had some discussions about individual versus community. So obviously with the mum herself initially, whether we needed to look at ensuring that she had an opportunity to meet with a culturally appropriate child health service, child health nurse. There may be some mothers groups that she may be able to be part of, although whether they would be culturally suitable, that would need to be addressed as well. And whether she still had contact with her settlement support officer and whether that they might be able to provide some ongoing support for that mum. But then we had the the community part of it as well, as far as promoting the service. So looking at as having some pictorial or translated promotional information about the services that were available. And then I suppose from a community level, also then looking at establishing that support group. Is there a place in the community that they would already prefer to go to? So try and go to them and establish in something that's, you know, would they prefer to meet outdoors? Do they prefer to meet around a meal? Or would they prefer to go to a central cultural hall or something? What is most appropriate for them? And is there a need for creche support? Can some of the older mums within the community, is there into that intergenerational thing where the older mums will come and support the young mums and look after the kids while they're having their group sessions? So looking at some of those requirements as well. I think that's the most of what we got down, but hopefully the others will add in anything significant I've missed.
That was great. That was very thorough. Yeah.
Amazing.
That was good. I just want to make one point on that one, and that was sometimes it's quite interesting to know what people's relationship is with their phone, right? So if there's an issue around stigma, particularly around mothers, or they don't want the rest of the community to know, the phone is the best method of engagement as well. You know, it's a good method, and a lot of the research, Dr. Amy Baker did some research on this with they wanted to reduce the impact of depression and anxiety. They did some research and they said the phone and technology, it can be really valuable because you try to explain to people about who are particularly have been dealt very harshly by government about confidentiality. You know, that's a really hard driver within some communities. So the phone actually gives them that confidence that it's private as well. And this is becoming apparent in the latest research that was done last year on anxiety and depression for CAL communities. So that's just something else that we could add into that, is about the use of new technology.
Because we did have a conversation about whether in some situations, whether they've actually had all the paperwork in place with Telstra and some of those other places in order to be able to even get a phone, or whether, depending on their home situation, whether they've got access to one. So we did wonder whether that was going to be a goer or not.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's always something. Again, you're dealing with an individual on that, or in case of the collective, you might want to talk about their access or something like that. But they have found that the technology has been really valuable. Usually the phone, not computers. People forget that most people do all their work through their phone, not laptops and PCs. That was great. Thank you very much for that. Next group.
Yep, so that was, sorry if I say this wrong, but Gamboripai, Joanne, Matt, Rebecca, Nicole, and Agnes. That was group 3. Does anyone want to add any more to maybe the first couple of questions? How would you promote your service and what considerations you would take to ensure timely promotion? I'd love to hear more about that.
Yes, so I'll be representing our group. A lot of the stuff that's been discussed, we also kind of discussed it, but we kind of took more of a individual approach in consideration of the community. So the first thing was obviously working with the young mother and finding out who she is, her background and whatnot, and then finding out whether or not she would be even interested in joining an initiative that has her community, because a lot of times, sometimes people might be outcasted or maybe they don't want to be a part of the community. So in this scenario, our young mother actually wanted to be a part of her community. So we looked into obviously where the community or the group go, so community centers, and we also mentioned Isha, which is a center that actually deals with a lot of multicultural women's health, and they run programs as well that can tailor to the needs of mental health, but in a space where it's not so clinical. So we thought that if we understood that basic, then we could actually go into the promotion aspect. So we would probably promote through the community groups, or we would promote with resources that have images or that are easy to depict for that demographic. Then we also considered the timely promotion by working with somebody who's already tapped into the community. So if this was something that we had a short time span, then we want to work with somebody who's a part of the community, or like a translator, or an organization that already has built that rapport. So that was, I guess, where we were looking at it from. And we also talked about social media. So things like WhatsApp groups, Facebooks, maybe that would be another way to convey information to the community. So that was, I guess, the first point of building relationship and getting the information out there. Now, in regards, do you want me to continue with the other two or no?
Yeah.
Keep going.
So in creating welcoming atmospheres, we definitely looked at the aspect that they're young mothers, so things to do with like creche or creating spaces where children are supported. So we even thought about venues, maybe potentially going to a park where it's easy accessible, maybe community centers that have creches, or getting that support elsewhere, or going to a service that has that holistic service, because there's a lot of organizations that already run programs for specific target groups, or maybe tapping into their communities and just sharing with those communities the resources that are already existing. But in regards to creating a welcoming environment, we also talked about the importance of food and actually catering it to the young women. So maybe having food that was similar culturally, just to create that aesthetics. A lot of these communities, enjoy having tea and having light snacks. So maybe things, aromas that create familiarity and comfort, so that they can be able to sit and really discuss things. Obviously not straightforward to the mental health, but creating that atmosphere where they feel like they can connect and, put their guard down. Some of the barriers that we thought about, definitely accessibility was the first one. We were thinking in regards to transport. So would they able to get to the place? So would they be catching a bus, driving a car, a train? So that goes back down to the venue that we would pick, or the service that we would pick to cater to those needs. Then we also talked about the social norms and stigma. So maybe there'd be uncomfortable to come to this program or this initiative because maybe there was a stigma in the community about the organization or just what was going on. So how we could oversee that. And so next part, we also said, so increase in accessibility. So we also mentioned having interpreters or somebody who understood the culture and language because of the little English that the young women may have, and partners with diverse organizations. So definitely organization like ISHAR, only because of the work that they do in the health and the community aspect. And we also did talk about the Sister Project, which is basically a project that's in Ellenbrook. And it's like a informal way for women to gather and to do things that help them connect. So through arts and crafts, through like other things, cultural stuff, but they also get external organizations to come in to deliver services to the group. So these are some of the stuff that we thought would benefit this young mother. So yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. That's really good. Very excellent. Yeah, most impressed. So it's quite interesting about assets. You know, when you're working with former refugees in particular, that Assets has a good programs and good people that work there that assist people that have some good knowledge and resources, as well as another organization you can partner with. Yeah, that was great. Sorry about that. So Apu, is there another group?
We'll just kind of open it to the other two groups as well, and if anyone else wants to add in to any of the points that have already been shared.
Yep.
Hi everyone, it's Leah here from Group 4. Yeah, look, most of what we've got has been covered already by all the fantastic responses that have preceded. I think a few things I noted that I don't know if we've covered or not, so apologies if we haven't, I didn't realise. We had, in our group, we had people who knew very little about the Hazara community and then people who knew a lot. So we're very lucky like that. We had a spectrum of familiarity. But for those who didn't, we talked about researching about the Hazara community, so you know the sort of cultural norms and barriers, but also being careful not to make assumptions because someone might not fit the mold that you imagine after that research either. We talked about the stigma issues associated with mental health, both ones unique to the Hazara community, but also just universal stigma and expectations and issues around mental health. One of the guys in our group raised that if it was him in this situation, he may have to delegate running of this meeting or group organisation or whatever ended up being the right fit to a female staff member, even though they could be there and around and supporting, it might not be suitable for them to be driving, so to speak. Now I think we've covered all the next notes. The other thing we talked about, which I thought was interesting to note, was to consider maintaining a presence as well. So not just having like a once-off fly in, do your thing and get out, but also how could you continue to have regular connection with the individual, but also with the community. And that's probably something really to ask them, like what would work for them to be engaged in an ongoing way, whether it was a regular picnic or sports match or visit to an existing organisation that they have, and potentially have like a little, I guess like pool of people that would go to that, which could be like people who know the specifics of the health system, who might be able to take questions about how to navigate it or who they can ask for help about what thing. Maybe have a mental health practitioner there, and potentially there'd be considerations with whether they're in uniform, not in uniform, how formal it was, I suppose, because you don't want to trigger trauma or distrust, but you also want them to be professional, so be a fine balance there. yeah, and perhaps have some people at such an event that could provide ongoing mentoring to people to navigate the system and understand how it works. Look, our group had so many more good ideas than what I've said, but they're the ones I can think of that weren't covered already or weren't necessarily covered in the same angle that we were talking about. But please chime in for my group if I've missed anything or misrepresented anything.
We covered transport. I'm just wondering if we missed that, we might need, that could be a barrier to people getting to sessions, whether it needs to be close enough they can walk, or whether we need to look at providing taxi vouchers or something as a thing.
As you can you hear me? Yeah. As you can understand, you've got to be very well resourced to work with people from marginal groups, you know. So you do have to ensure, you know, when you're applying for funding as an NGO or whatever, that you do actually have the right goods to do the good job, you know. And I have seen in the community shortcuts, and that's not, I'm not blaming anyone, but you do see shortcuts. And, you know, as we know, interpreting is very expensive, very important to have a multicultural workplace. So you've got many languages in one workplace, you know, that can help cut the funding for interpreters, for example. But it's also really important, and you mentioned that, about the continuity and the trust, and keeping not just a one fly on the wall thing, that you actually become an ally of that group. And that if it's you and you're going to leave to get a more powerful job because you're so spectacular, your new person that comes in, it'd be great if you go in and introduce them, you know, to start that trust. So many times communities have developed a trust, and the next minute someone new has walked in and they've got to start all over again. So these are just organizational issues as well when you're working with these groups. That was fabulous. Thank you very much. You sure you guys needed to do this workshop? I tell you, it's brilliant. Yeah, it's fantastic. Is there anyone else now?
Did anyone else want to share their groups? I think the last group had Claire, Henrietta, Joanna, Lisa.
Are they there?
We were also just talking about the value of not just turning up once and sort of going repeatedly to whatever particular events, and just having a presence there to build that rapport. So certainly in line with the other group. Even someone suggested joining their local Facebook group, things like that, and also just mentioning that the relationship can't be measured as a KPI, but the value in building that rapport and in showing up is huge in the success of your actual program and your interventions.
That's good. Yep. Is there anything else anyone wants to make comment on? How's the time going?
Agnes has yeah. Did you want to add?
Thank you. Yeah, I just like to add in, because in this scenario we're talking about someone with mental health issue, to actually do a lot of education in that space as well. So to be there and support is great, but as a new person to the Australian society and community, to educate, you know, what is bulk build for a start. When I moved here 8 years ago, I didn't know that. So it's small things that we might take for granted, but the educational piece, I think, is very important to a GP, but also into the mental health system if that is needed.
Yep. Yes, I agree. And you're speaking on lived experience, Agnes. I'm sure if bulk bill, that would have knocked you around a bit. Yeah, that's very true. Thank you for that. That was really good, and I'm sure you've either know a lot or you listen to me. I don't know. Yeah, I didn't know what your background is, but what I want to say, my offsider who couldn't give comment here, he couldn't make his Hazara himself. and he's a community leader of one particular group. And he said some of the issues around the Hazara community are financial. You know, the finances are fairly grim, you know, as you could imagine, being in their marginalised group and refugees. Said they've he said integration, people are very shy, you know, most are finding it hard to integrate into general society. They said they've got mental health issues and physical health issues within the Hazara. He's also said there's some domestic violence through the compounded by the financial and the integration and the transition process for them. And he also said there's a very poor understanding of institutions and organizations. Even my colleague said when he arrived in, he had spent 40 years of war in Afghanistan. And when the only white people he had contact with or government people were from Australian aid or not Australian aid, from aid agencies or United Nations. So anything like roads or buildings were always funded from aid agencies, right? So when he arrived in Perth and he saw the Narrows Bridge, he wanted to know what aid agency paid for that, right? You can imagine, and he thinks that's a funny story now. But at the time, his concept was that everything was about aid, you know, when he came from Afghanistan. So he had to go through he was a clever boy, you know, so he had to go through a total relearning about what governments meant and what the role of government was. So he said that's a big issue in the community, is understanding what they went. And I don't know about you guys when you're working with whole clients, how many people say, why do I have to fill out this form? I've already given the government my details. You know, we've had people say things like that. You know what I mean? So the whole concept of the government can be quite scary. Another one group of former refugees said lanyards scare them. You know, people coming in with lanyards all the time because it represents the government, even though it might be an NGO or, you know, something like that. So little things like they're very subtle things that can trigger issues for former refugees. And he said there was lack of trust. And he said the possible solutions are involving bilingual or bicultural staff, right, in your work. Always support and facilitate anything where it integrates CALD communities into the Australian world, and that professionals should attend as many workshops like these as possible. That was his final comment. So I just wanted to give you his little bit of feedback as well. The next thing that I wanted to do, when people filled out, I was just actually looking for it, when people filled out what comments, you know, what they wanted to get out of the workshop, I saw that some people wanted to know different ways to work with mental health or domestic violence, new strategies. You can't, when you're looking at cultural competence responsiveness, you're looking at a very broad spectrum. So that's why I gave you all that theory at the beginning, so that you can use that theory to apply to each different community that you work with. Because no matter what community you're going to work with, you're going to have to learn about that community, right? So this is really an important part of that's why I can't really answer specific questions that some people put in that request. But I know we're going to finish up now. well, and I'll hand you back to Apu. But is there any questions or any comments that people would like to make before basically I sign off?
Yeah, if you
Well, I
have
won't
any
sign off.
questions, please use the chat box or feel free to unmute yourself and just ask directly
Yes,
to
that's
Deb.
right.
Quick question, if that's okay. You just mentioned about integrating multicultural activities into Australian communities as much as possible. So can you just clarify that a little bit more?
Me, Deb?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Yes, and it's already happening. I mean, it's happened from, say, the blessing of the fleet in Fremantle, right? Was a big Italian. That happened when the Italians came. And the streets of Fremantle, and when I was a little girl, my parents, I hung with the Italians, so I was walking with the blessing of the fleet, you know, and I, you know, I had my church to go to, but I ended up going with the Italians to the Roman Catholic, and Mrs. Simeone always put a hanky on my head. This is only when I was 6 or 7, you know. These things get ingrained into our culture. These are cultural values. I mean, now in Fremantle we have the Indian festival of the colours of Dali in the streets in South Terrace, and everyone's getting involved. So people know how to do dancing, you know, who are Western and Aboriginal and everything. So, you know, while we have all this shareness and the celebration of culture, it has incredible impact in getting everyone to be a part of that culture as well. It's sort of like a reverse cultural experience. I think also, just while I'm here, I just wanted to mention, and I'm sure you thought about this, but the best thing, one of the best things is sport. Because it doesn't matter what culture you come from, you come together and you've got one set of familiarity and one set of rules. You've got familiarity of the team and the colours you've got, and you've got the set of rules, which is how you behave, right? So that is a really good example. Sport is a fantastic way, and we see that now. You see Sudanese Aussie rules football players, just, you know, and look at the Italians, you know, Dacos in Collingwood, you know, and sport's fantastic for bringing it together. And I remember in the 70s, they used to have in Victoria ethnic groups playing soccer, and then there'd be big blues and riots and everything after, you know, the Slavs would, the Serbians would play the Croatians or whatever, and there'd be, you know, big. And so in Victoria, they cancelled that they couldn't have their ethnic specific soccer groups, football teams. And then it all got blended up. They totally restructured the whole soccer world. And now you've got all different cultures playing together, like in the Perth Glory or whatever. So sport's also a fantastic thing for integration and crossing over cultures, you know. It's a really valuable thing for kids and for parents, and the latest one I think is for integration as well as the men's shed, you know, getting older men into the men's sheds. You know, they're primarily white, middle, you know, working class, middle class men, but getting that we've had MMRC, Metropolitan Migrant Resource Centre, has had a integrate, you know, getting more of new migrant men into the men's sheds, you know, to get some of that cross-cultural stuff. Yeah, so anyway, that's just my final comments on that. Has anyone else got any, does that answer your question?
Yes, it was me, Jo.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I work in the wheat belt, so we don't have a lot of cow communities. We work more with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, but we do have some communities that have higher populations of Filipino
Yes.
immigrants. And
Yep.
so we're trying to develop some activities along what you were saying. That's why I just asked the question, because one of the discussions we had at our last wellbeing plan meeting was about trying to develop a universal calendar that every community could put in their activities that they're having within the community, that so that everyone could start to attend each other's cultural communities where appropriate, to try and build up some of that. So I just wanted to make sure I was clear about what you were saying to ensure that we're kind of on the right track.
Yeah, you're definitely on the right track. Well, the Filipinos have this dancing with bamboo poles. Have you ever seen that?
No.
No, that's really something you see when you go to the Philippines, you know?
Yeah, well, they were talking about a dragon festival or something that they'd had up there, but it had been predominantly just with their community. So we will try and see if we can get that to be a little bit more public within that community.
Yep, that's good community development stuff, that one. Yep. Thank you, Jo. Is there anything else? Anyone got anything to say? Oh, well, I wish you well with whatever your endeavors are. And I think that I'm sorry about the hiccups at the beginning. I hadn't worked my Zoom for a while. You know, I've been doing face-to-face workshops up until all the COVID barriers have been dropped. Now we're back to Zoom. So I'll promise I'll pick up my game with that one. But thanks for APU for supporting me. At least I knew where my weaknesses were.
Thank you, Deb. That was an amazing workshop and you did that really well. There's some great points there, and I feel like everyone knew a lot as well. So they kind of brought a lot to the to the discussion. I'll just wrap it up by doing just a bit of a conclusion. Give me 2 seconds. So I know we've gone through the questions. We do have a lot of training and events coming up at Injury Matters. We have a whole host of webinars and online workshops as well as in person. Check it out on our website. It is just in the events tab. And yeah, feel free to register your interest in any of them that fancy your interest. We also have an injury prevention network. So if you work in the injury prevention space as health professionals, it's a network that meet 4 times a year, and it's just a way to collaborate and share any projects or any information that you want to share with other health professionals. And it's a great space to collaborate and hear about what's been happening in the injury prevention space. So if you're interested, just flick me an email and I can add you to the list. We have a meeting on Friday, actually. So if you're interested, I can always add you to that, and it'll be a good little thing to be a part of. We also have an evaluation survey that will pop up at the end of this workshop, and we'd love to hear more about what you what you thought about today's workshop, but also for future trainings. We'd love to know if you have any more ideas in that space as well. So yeah, please send us through that feedback. We also have Connected, which is an online networking platform for health professionals. You get matched up with another health professional in the injury prevention space, and that is every 2 months, and you can have a chat and actually just share what you've been doing in the space. And we have Michelle and Kristen who met up for coffee and said some great things about the online platform. So feel free to register. It is on our website as well. And you can use the QR code on your screen there to sign up. And that is it from us today. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Deb for doing this. And it was really valuable for all of us. I feel like I've learned a lot as well. So thank you. And thank you all for taking the time to join us and share what you thought about today's workshop. So yeah, thank you so much. Have a lovely day, and feel free to let us know what you thought about today.
Cool.